you've been following me for a while, you might have picked up that I like Hazbin-related. Something about the 3 dedicated handmade cosplay videos that have come before this might have tipped you off there. This is the 4th video in my Hazbin-related hype brain rot state. Luckily for me, it's not a whole new cosplay that I'm starting, but rather a follow-up video from my last one on those 5-meter long Husk wings. My main focus for this video is making Husk some moving cat ears, so hopefully swiveling and twitching a little bit, kind of like real cat ears. And I'll show you how I made the other parts of the cosplay too, but for me, the favorite part of this video is going to be those ears. Because you might have also picked up that I really like moving parts in my cosplays. I put fishing rods in my wings, I put fishing line on my arms, I have blinking eyes and swiveling eyes, and I've made my fair share of moving ears before. Anyway, hello, I'm Miss Twisted. You can call me Charlotte. I do cosplay and makeup and other weird and whimsical little projects. Before we get stuck in, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably seen news about whatever latest company has had a bunch of data leaks. Protecting your personal data has never been more important. I swear for years I was using the same password I had since I was a teenager. It was Silver Dragon 99, same password for every website. Yeah, real secure there, teenage Charlotte. Luckily, I take cybersecurity a little bit more seriously these days. That's why I'm now using today's video partner, NordVPN. NordVPN have so many security features to help you stay just a little bit more incognito and safe while on the internet. For example, you can turn on the dark web monitor to get alerts about your details that appear on underground hacker websites. Use my URL nordvpn.com/misstwisted to get NordVPN for yourself. Every purchase of a 2-year plan will receive an extra 4 bonus months on top, but that's only when you use my nice shiny URL here. And there's loads more features where that comes from. NordVPN can encrypt your online traffic even when you're out and about on free public Wi-Fi. Or their threat protection scans files while they download for dangerous malware. So even if something slips through the cracks of your discerning eyes, NordVPN have got your back. And not to mention the other benefits with NordVPN. Turns out there's tons of stuff on Australian streaming services that other countries don't get. But you can change your virtual location thanks to NordVPN and boom, ready to watch your favorite niche cartoon. Once again, head to my exclusive URL, nordvpn.com/misstwisted to get NordVPN and receive 4 bonus months with any purchase of a 2-year plan. That's only with my link and applies to any of the plans, standard, plus, and complete. That link will be in the description below. Try it for yourself. Nord have got a 30-day money-back guarantee, so what are you waiting for? Thank you again so much to Nord for partnering with me today. Now let's get back to it. So quick breakdown of this cosplay from the bottom to the top just because it seems to be the order that makes sense to me. We've got his lovely long tail with a big fan of feathers. We've got some funky little suspenders with some gold buttons. We've got his cute little glove claw things, some big hairy eyebrows, a whimsically tiny hat, and then of course the ears themselves. And let's be honest, I'm gonna need a smaller pair of wings if I want to wear this to a convention, because unless I want to be gently slapping random strangers in the face with my wings, I cannot wear the 5-meter wide pair of wings to a convention. For the base clothing, I just bought a pair of black pants, a white shirt, and a black waistcoat. Because these elements are so basic, I just don't think it's a good use of my time to try and make those elements from scratch. It's not like I'm entering this one in a competition. So let's start with the tail. So I'm starting off with this cheap cat's tail from a Halloween store because I already owned it and it's already falling apart. But this is too short and skinny for the cat's tail I want. So I've got this bigger piece of armature wire here. I've wrapped it around with the original wire sticking out of the tail. I'm just reinforcing this a little bit with some tape. And if you're wondering why I'm using fragile tape, long story short, I bought way too much of it years ago and have been trying to use it up ever since. I'm keeping a nice little circle of wire at the end. That's the part that's going to sit against my body and hopefully hold the tail away from me a bit. To pad out this extra bit of wire, I've just got a piece of upholstery foam I've slit down the middle. That's just going to fit right over here. To join these sections together a little bit, I just have a strip of cotton batting here that I'm just going to wrap around it like a bandage. And then we're going to use an even bigger strip of this batting and basically cover the entire tail with it. This is just going to help pad everything out and make this sort of like conjoined little section one whole piece. I was using my quick dry adhesive but realized that with foam and this batting, the hot glue gun works really well. With my tail base now beefed up, I added these little EVA foam pieces for the purpose of holding up the feathery fan at the end and covered the whole thing in black velvet. I'm skipping over both these steps because I ended up stripping back both of them later on. time. Anyway, for the actual feathery parts, I'm using that same polycell packing foam that I use for my wings. So I'm just roughly freehand sketching the shape that I want, and this is just gonna give me my nice little base pattern. His tail looks very different in like most different screenshots, so I'm just using this concept art here for the main shape. Alrighty, at this stage, I am pretty happy with how the shape is looking. Now the tricky part here is I'm essentially adapting a very flat, simple 2D shape into a 3D costume. And that often means finding ways to give details and texture while still being recognizable as the original 2D shape. So much like how I did the wings, I want my tail to be made up of a bunch of individual feathers that come together to make that shape. But that's about as close as I get to an organized plan. Apart from that, everything is just vibes and sketching. And so my individual feathers will trace out on the 3mm polycell packing foam. I'm gonna need at least 2 sets of this one for the left and right side of that fan. Each of these pieces I am gluing down onto the base, ready to paint the whole thing up all together. Unlike the wings, I wasn't too worried about having all of the individual feathers like shaded, so I'm not too worried about painting these before I glue them together. It was around this moment that I realized I didn't need those extra foam pieces on the tail and took those off. Instead, I glued my fan straight to the tail, but later on I took this off again anyway. Look, all of my projects are just experiment, trial and error. I did have this great idea to put a bit of glue in the middle and pinch the 2 sides together. So it's dried overnight now, and I think the one thing that having that like little glue patch where I've pinched it in a little bit has done means that all of the foam on either side is kind of like all slightly curving up a little bit. And I think that gives it some nice dimension. It should helpfully also hold it relatively flat rather than like wilting downwards. So it's painting time. We are going to tape up all of this black velvet section of the tail, and you can see I taped off some of the edge of this fan as well where that section's going to be white. For everything else, it is getting a good healthy layer or 2 of black plastidip. Apparently I didn't shake this can enough or warm it up or something because it is speckling everywhere. I did figure out I could hang it off the garage door to dry so I could do both sides at once. Before I painted in this red layer, you might spot an extra bit of masking tape through the middle there. That's just masking where that extra black stripe is going to be on the tail. We're going to add just a faint bit of black around the outside of this just to add a tiny bit of shading. So I was staring at the tail while the fan part was drying, and I realized like I'm not satisfied with how I did the tail covering. Like the fact that I've used patchwork scraps of velvet and that I've glued them over instead of sewing them. I don't know if that's gonna last super long, like if it's gonna be durable long term. And I'm just like, why am I cutting the corners? I've got a spotlight 10 minutes from my house. I know how to sew. So yeah, I cut the fan off and I'm gonna recover this one with one whole piece. Like I'm sure it looks pretty decent in camera. It looks pretty decent even from here, but like I can see those like ratty seams that have just been glued together. And even if it looks fine to everyone else, I'm not gonna be happy with this unless I give it a good cover now. So that's the plan. So a trip to Spotlight later, and they are sold out of velvet. Anyway, I got this, which looks kind of like a velvet. This is just like a big velour kind of, I don't know, it's a fleece. Basically, it's a nice thick fleece. And from this side, it looks like velvet. And the good thing about it being fleece is it gives everything a bit of padding so that when I wrap it over this, if there's any lumpy bits that still remain, those should kind of disappear behind that padding. So basically, I've cut out 2 pieces that look like this. I'm gonna sew them with the right sides together, turn it inside out, create like a giant long tail sock, and just pull it over the old one and see how that goes. So we're just sewing with like a classic bag lining thing. We've got the right sides together. We are sewing up and down either side of these 2 very long wedges. I did discover that fleece gets caught up in my sewing machine real bad. But weird little life hack I found, if I put a bit of scrap paper over this while I sew it, it stops any of those little fleece fibers getting caught in the sewing machine. And once you're done sewing, you can just tear it away. I've literally just made like a DIY inferior tear away stabilizer. But hey, it got the job done. Turning my big long sock inside out, I basically just tried to stuff the tail into it and slowly pull it down like I was stuffing a sausage. Actually, come to think of it, I have no idea how you stuff a sausage. Is probably nothing like this. Look, I know this all looks very hilarious. I was just trying to get all of the wrinkles out of this and make sure it fully covers the tail. I'm finishing off my new and improved tail with just some hand stitching to make sure it's fully covering that wire base at the end. All right, we're done. This probably looks exactly the same to you guys, but trust me, this looks way better in person. And I feel like it's probably gonna last much longer as well because it's actually sewn together. Now, while the tail fan section was cut off from the main part of the tail, I took the opportunity to touch up some of those painting areas where the painter's tape had pulled away some of the black plastidip, and like it looks pretty flawless, honestly. Like, this was just acrylic paint and I was so impressed by how well it seemed to work on the foam. I went back in with some dry brushing and touched up just some of the areas that needed a little extra shading.
I'm reattaching the tail fan with some quick dry adhesive. I didn't quite trust hot glue for this part.
All right, the little tail fan thing is back attached to my new and improved tail. God, this thing is really massive. Look at this next to my head. I didn't realize how big I'd made this.
For the last part of painting this, we just want to spray the very tip here white. So I'm going to tape up and mask every other part of the tail. The base foam is of course already white, aside from the parts where the previous spray painting had bled past the tape. So I'm hoping even a single layer of white Plastidip and then a layer of just plain white matte spray paint will be enough here.
God damn, you guys. This tail is looking really freaking sleek. I'm really happy with that. I took the tape off outside. I'm sorry I didn't film it. I just kind of forgot and got excited to take it off. There's like a couple little bits here where you had a little tiny bit of like spray paint bleeding. So I'm literally just going to go over that with some acrylic paint to try and clean it up a little bit. And once I've done that, this tail is done. So here we are back to present day, or I guess for you guys watching this YouTube video, it's past day. I don't know, timing is weird. Anyway, the tail turned out really nicely. The only thing I've done since that last stuff that you saw is spray this down with like a matte varnish to basically seal in all of the paint to protect it, and it just makes it a little bit less glossy as well. The other thing I've done is add in a little tiny bit of fishing line tied around right near the tip here. Basically that means that when this is like attached around my waist, this part here can help hold the sort of fan section off the ground and stop it like dragging along. I could also have this like tied around my wrist so the tail's kind of floating alongside me. That's a pretty tried and true method with a lot of tails in cosplay, and hey, it works. All right, moving on to the claws and the gloves.
So Husk has got tiny love hearts in the middle of his palms. I freehand cut my little love hearts out of some EVA foam, and I'm just gonna wrap some gold sequin fabric around these shapes. I wanted to add just a little bit of sparkle here and there on this Husk cosplay, just to lean into that gambling Las Vegas kind of theming. I've got some thick, stretchy black fabric I've just traced the shape of my forearm onto, including a curve out to accommodate for my thumb. This shape is mirrored before I cut it out onto the fabric, and before I sew them together, I'm going to glue my love heart right into the center of the palm.
I seem to be developing a bit of a bad habit of every single project there ends up being a couple little chunks here and there where I just kind of forget to hit record while I'm crafting, just because I kind of get like lost in the sauce. Anyway, I have an arm warmer.
I'm so sorry that I skipped filming this bit, but just to elaborate here, basically I put the right sides together so that yellow heart was inside when I was sewing it. I sewed a seam along this edge here and this edge, and the edge at the bottom and the top here, I just did a rolled hem, so folding over the fabric twice before sewing it together.
Now, besides his arm warmers, he does have like white clawed hand sort of thing. So I've got some white nylon, sort of nice and stretchy. I'm gonna try and sew like literally just a line down here and create like a nice little pointed finger. I want to see if that looks good as is or whether I need something a bit more complicated. So let's have a look. Okay, so first test run. That was incredibly easy and it looks really good. So that's a really good sign. I'm gonna see if I can get all my fingers looking that good. I'll obviously turn it inside out. Just wanted to test the stitching. Yeah.
Now I'm just sewing these fingers together with a straight stitch, even though it's a stretchy fabric, just because I don't really need it to stretch lengthways. We're cutting the excess off, we are turning this inside out, and boom, there you have it, a really nice looking claw.
All right, so these are looking pretty freaking good just on my fingers. So let's try it on with the glove now and see how it looks. That looks fantastic. What the heck?
So with my own seal of approval, I want to get these attached to the gloves themselves. Now I am very precariously pinning this one in place while I'm wearing it, so I know exactly where to sew to attach it. Honestly, at this stage, I've poked myself with a pin so many times, I think I'm just immune to it. With at least the top side pinned in place here, I'm going to very carefully take this glove off, and my plan here is that I should be able to get at least the top part here sewn in with the sewing machine. The tricky part is making sure that each of those fingers are pulled back so that you're only stitching onto the top half of the fingers and the top half of the glove. So you can see that these are still fully open, so I can get my fingers in there. Once I manage to get the glove and fingers back on, I'm going to pin these back in place on the underside, and at this stage I don't think I can get away with doing the machine sewing for this one, so I'm just turning these ones inside out and trying to do a couple of really good tacking stitches to get these in place.
All right, both gloves are looking fantastic. For the right hand, they have not been attached at the front here, so that I can literally just pull out my fingers in case I need to use my phone, tap away, text a friend, check the con map, all that sort of thing. Moving on.
Making our way up to the suspenders. For this, I have a bunch of these self-covering buttons. I am going to glue some more of that spangly gold fabric right over these. I think with these self-cover buttons, you don't really need to apply the glue, but I'm doing it anyway. Basically, you stretch your fabric over the button, and at the back, these little teeth catch and hold it in place. And then this extra little piece just snaps right over it, and you've got yourself a nice covered button. This was my first time using these. I had no idea how easy this was. I'm probably going to be using this in the future a bunch now. Suspenders was another thing I really just didn't feel like making the base for, so I bought an existing pair of plain black suspenders, and I glued some black velvet ribbon around some of the sections where the silver hardware was showing, and then I just glued my little gold buttons right to the front. I made a third gold button for the hat later on, but otherwise we're moving straight on to the eyebrows.
Actually, while editing this footage, I'm going back through and I realized I want to pause here for a second and say I don't recommend this method for doing Husk's eyebrows to most people. Obviously, if you have a latex allergy, avoid this entirely, but even for everyone else, you're essentially making these as prosthetics to glue over the top of your existing eyebrow hair. I often use like Spirit Gum and Prozaid, and you can get really good removers that can help you remove this, but pretty much anytime I wear something like this over my eyebrows, there is a risk of me ripping out a fairly decent portion of my eyebrow hair. That is a risk that I'm happy to take on, but I don't want to be responsible for anyone accidentally waxing their own eyebrows off. So unless you feel really confident with using something like Prozaid and Spirit Gum and removing it without taking off any hair, or fully blocking out your eyebrows so there's no risk of that, I'd probably look at just painting in your eyebrows instead for a more subtle look. No amount of accuracy or like showmanship for cosplay should be worth causing damage to yourself. Anyway, I'm still going to show you how I did it, but just keep those factors in mind.
Now, I really wanted some cartoonishly large eyebrows, but I didn't want them to look flat. My plan here is to basically make my own prosthetics. I've got some baking paper. I think for Americans, this is called like parchment paper or wax paper, and I'm just laying down a tiny bit of liquid latex that I'm going to stick this piece to, and this is literally just cardboard that I painted red. For the feathery texture, I've got a bunch of these dyed red peacock eyes. I've had these sitting in my craft stash for years now, so I'm so excited to use them. I've cut off just the head here, and I'm going to trim the ends here just to get rid of those more curly bits, and I'm going to cut this in half directly to one side of the spine of the feather, because that spine is going to make sure it all holds together even once you've cut it. I'm using my trusty quick dry adhesive right here on the end, and then gluing that piece down, and we're just going to keep layering that up, working from the outside towards the center. By now you can probably see why I wanted to use these peacock feathers in particular, right? They have this weird mix of feathery and hairy texture to it, which works perfectly for Husk since he's both cat and bird-like. When my latex is dry, it peels off the wax paper perfectly, and I can trim off any excess. For the little stripes on this one, I'm going to paint these ones in. I'm using a jacquard airbrush paint because this one I believe is designed for fabrics, and because it's a little bit transparent, it soaks into the feather beautifully, which means it doesn't really destroy the texture.
You guys, we are finally up to the part that I've been looking forward to the most. So let me tell you a little bit about my plan for the ears. As I mentioned at the start, I have made tons of different kinds of moving ears before, but they've all pretty much been like this kind of axis, straight up and down, not too difficult to figure out. What I would really love is to try and capture more cat-like movement. So like swiveling side to side to hear movement, perking right up, and then when they're not having a good time, pulling right back and to the side. I think those movements could really add something lifelike and animated to this cosplay. That's if I can pull it off, because as I filmed this, I'm almost finished the ears, but I haven't yet tested them out on the full cosplay, so I still don't know yet if this is going to work. So this whole thing came about because of this little wheel that I found at Bunnings. I was there to buy parts for the stilts that you would have seen in one of my previous videos, but I went past this and noticed that it had like the swiveling motion like this, and then of course you also have the wheel itself. So I'm imagining if you can somehow like attach an ear to it, you can have a movement that goes this way, and the swivel will allow it to move on this axis as well. The closest I've seen to something like this being done before would be like the Cos ears or the ear gear from the Tail Company. Now these do have that swiveling motion, but as far as I can tell, they don't move in other directions as well. And I think the other downside is the way it moves makes it seem a little bit floaty, like it's not fully attached to the head. And that's not me saying that these are bad, they are absolutely fantastic. What an amazing effect. But I like using it as a starting point and thinking about how I can learn from that to improve my own design. Anyway, my entire philosophy is based on just trying stuff until it works or until I cry. So we're just gonna jump straight in. I have a scrap piece of craft foam here. I'm gonna cut out like a very rough shape for an ear. So ear, and then I'm gonna kind of have it like that. That's your ear shape. All right, so first thoughts are, because like a lot of them you can kind of wrap around like that, so you've got this little flappy bit at the front, I could use that to sort of wrap around this little wheel section here like this. And then that means that like, even if this is the front, you could turn it. But then there's the problem is you can't use the wheel if I'm attaching this to that. It kind of needs to be attached to the wheel and not to that. I think I'm gonna try and see if I can drill a hole through the wheel, like from the side here. Yeah, be right back. The drill's not gonna cut it. I don't have a drill bit small enough to go through this rubbery bit here. So I think I've just realized there's like a plastic layer, which is that white section, and then the gray here is a rubber section. So I might be able to get a sewing needle like between those layers a little bit.
With some careful stabbing, I was able to get the sewing needle through there and get some thread through there as well, which meant I can essentially sew the piece of foam to the wheel itself. I'm mostly just using like some tacking stitches. I have no idea what I'm actually doing here, but that's at least gonna hold it in place. I'm also gonna be using some contact adhesive, which again, make sure you're wearing your respirator, to also glue the foam to the wheel here. The most important part is that it's nicely attached but can still move on both axes.
Right now it's pinned in place. That's a good start. Don't really need to worry about the shape too much just yet. That is a problem for later. Ideally, like with this end bit that kind of joins up here, I would love to have it so that like part of this actually stays put within the wig, but like way more down here sort of thing. Because one thing that really bugs me about how a lot of those ears work is that like the whole thing kind of moves like this. It doesn't really look like it's connected to the head. And that kind of like breaks the illusion a little bit for me. So my idea is if something like there is my default position and I can have it swivel out like that and still have that bottom bit sort of stuck, staying in place.
So thinking about how this is going to attach to the wig towards the bottom corner, I'm just gluing some leftover pink lycra from when I did my angel dust cosplay and cutting it to shape.
All right, couple little changes I've made. For starters, when I first glued it on, I had the wheel part here sitting towards the back of the head when it was attached. And that meant that like when I go to swing it so that it sits at the side, this swings like up the head rather than having it swing down like that. And we want it swinging down. For that, we'd need to have it sitting forwards, and then that way it swings down like that, which is this motion. So on this one, I've done exactly that. It sits forwards now like this, and then when it swings down like that, so that you get like, even without doing much swiveling, you kind of get some good movement already, you know? Anyway, so as well as being able to like swing like this, you've also got this movement here, which you can kind of just do on its own and it still looks great. But if you have like swinging from the front and then swings down and back, that's pretty promising. I think with like a bunch of fur and having this covered, that could work pretty well. So I think from here, my next step is I'm gonna make 2 of these. I'm gonna keep the foam as the base, and we're gonna do all that before we get any fur on here, because I wanna make sure they're both working before we start wasting faux fur.
So we are once again gluing and sewing ear number 2. I'm also chucking in some extra little tacking stitches towards the top of the ear, just to kind of make sure that I'm encouraging that curve around.
All right, listen, I'm just so chuffed right now. I'm really happy with how this is working, because the last 3 or 4 projects I think that I've done have required so many different iterations and going back to the drawing board and trying something new to get it working. And this just kind of came together relatively fast, so it's just a nice change of pace. Anyway, in terms of like movement and things like this is working really well. For starters, this seems to be the neutral position it's sitting in if I have them going at this angle, which works out beautifully. In terms of movement, we've got a swivel, and then we've got the actual wheel itself. And even those 2 movements entirely separately work really well. Whether or not they're gonna work that well once I get like fur and everything on here and I'm trying to rig it up with some fishing line, that's a different story. We're gonna find out later.
All right, it's time to get some fur on these things. I'm gonna start with the white inside part of the ear, and it does feel a little bit wasteful using this lovely long pile faux fur and then shaving all of it down. But the other option would be like driving all the way to a fabric store to get some faux fur and then shave it down anyway, and I already had this lying around, so I was happy just using some scraps. I'm gonna glue to the back of my fur piece a piece of this white poplin. This is to try and make sure that faux fur is fully opaque, because when I placed it over the ear, you can see some of that pink foam through it. Honestly, I should have just used some white foam in the first place, but oh well. Luckily for the black, I happen to have around already some very short pile black fur and some longer pile for later on. So I'm gonna glue this fur straight to the back side of the ear. We're gonna cut away the last of the excess here and glue the last parts down. These little furry black hearts are literally just two pieces of the faux fur glued back to back, and I shaved and trimmed it down. We are just gonna stick a tiny bit of hot glue right on the bottom of that heart, and that's just gonna go right on the tip of the ear. Once again, we are gonna shave down all of this excess black fur. I'm leaving it especially short towards the tips and the edges and a little bit furrier right at the bottom. Once I cleaned off all of that excess fur with a lint roller, these are starting to look really clean. For the red hearts on his ears, I found this sheet of glittery foam red hearts in a $2 shop, so that was just great timing. I'm cutting the hearts into a more pronounced shape, and we're gonna create a bit of a nice outline here with some black paint. Once those hearts are in place, we've got some painting to do. Now this is a thinned out red fabric paint, so it soaks into the white fur without entirely ruining the texture. I'm creating a tiny bit of shading here with some red mixed with some black. Then we're coming in with some straight black to create a nice outline. But we are not yet done with the sparkles. We are lining the entire red section of these ears here with some red rhinestones. I especially wanted to add some more sparkle to the ears because these are the parts that are going to be moving and swiveling around, so hopefully they'll catch the light. Final touches with the black Sharpie, I'm going to go over the edges once more to bring back some of that definition we lost under the rhinestones.
All right, good morning everyone. We have some finished ears, or mostly finished. They're looking a little bit bald. We're going to add some extra fur and shagginess back into these later on, so just put a pin in that for now. The next part is going to be attaching these to the wig. I am going to sew them directly to the wig because they need to be solidly anchored before it can really move around nicely. And for that, I need the hat, which I've already made, so I'm going to like rewind to past Charlotte to show you how I made this. So while my taste in fashion has kind of evolved / devolved into like gothic Mrs. Frizzle, I used to be like a super hardcore goth and super into like black and white stripes, very much a baby bat sort of thing. So I've had this hat now for I think at least a decade, and I honestly love the shape of it so much. I think I'm going to try and replicate this shape for Husk's hat because I really like the curvy base here and the fact that it kind of like comes out a little bit at the top. It's very whimsical. This is like peak Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland kind of stuff.
Once again, I am operating on vibes alone. I am tracing my little hand mirror onto some EVA foam because it's roughly the same size as the rim of the hat. And for the main body of the hat, I've just kind of measured how high that is and cutting out a rectangle that same width.
So that's what my shape looks like, because my hope is that if I have these two pieces here and join them like this, that's going to create like a little curve inwards. Just, I don't know, whimsy, okay? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of making it up.
Before we glue these two pieces together, I'm going to blast it with the heat gun and just kind of curve it with my hands to encourage that cylindrical shape. I've got an extra tab here of EVA foam to help glue these down, just because the edge of this EVA foam is so thin, there wouldn't be much to grip onto. Once again, I am using contact adhesive, which means once again, I am wearing my respirator and I've got some ventilation coming through the window as well. And hey, this shape is already giving whimsy. For the top of my top hat, I have this little circle. I'm going to glue that straight down to some of my black stretchy fabric, cutting away the excess, and with the remaining edge, just gluing and folding that back over. And I'm pretty much going to do the same thing to the sides, just cover this whole bit of foam in glue and then wrap it in that same stretchy fabric. I kind of changed my mind about the very top of the top hat, so I'm just stretching some more black fabric back over this top with the excess cut off. Once again, I've got a nice thick velvet ribbon once more to glue around the rim here and hide those edges. For the brim of the hat, I am once again covering that cylinder with that stretchy fabric. I'm just going to glue that slightly curved cylinder onto that brim. Once again, with the excess trimmed off, I'm just cutting some little tiny tabs into what's left here so that when I fold it over onto the underside of the hat here, it'll be nice and easy to pull and glue down each piece as flat as possible. Are you getting deja vu yet? We've got one more round right on the bottom here of gluing and sticking down some stretchy black fabric. This time round, we're cutting off all the excess so that the fabric goes right up to the edge. To round off the brim, I've got some really thin bias tape. I'm just going to glue right over over the edge. I might have skipped over filming this part, but I have added some dark red ribbon and then some brightly colored satin ribbon as well around the rim. And to hide some of my crusty edges at the back of the hat, I'm just going to utilize some more of these glittery red hearts.
Ow. Oh, there was a pin still in there. Oh my god. If you're taking them off a freaking foam head, check your wigs for pins. Ow. I've got some glue on the bottom there. I'm going to stick that on. It's really just to hold it in place, and then I can secure it with some tacking stitches as well.
And you can see I added a gold button from the ones we made earlier.
I got 4 tacking stitches on here, basically just spread out around the rim of the hat there. So this isn't going anywhere between the stitching and the glue, so let's do the same thing with the ears.
I've got some extra strong thread for sewing on the ears. Luckily for me, all of these trolley wheels have little holes in them where you would usually screw them in, so I can use those to stitch them in instead.
All right, I think we have at least the base of these sewn down. Oh, I've made these very uneven. One of them is like, I don't know if you can see very well, one of them is way further forward on the hat, which I think is where I want it to be. All right, I'll be right back. I have to unpick the stitching on this one and bring that way further forward. Give me a second. All right, so this is sitting pretty decently now with both of these sewn in, and they're literally just sewn in like through the holes that you would usually put screws through on the metal, right? Right now they look a bit bat-like because they come down so low. I'm gonna keep these because having those sit down is gonna allow for like more movement through here. But I am going to like cover a lot of this with the faux fur later on. But for now, I think that kind of needs to get sewn in almost directly on the hairline. Great, they're now attached at the top and the bottom. It doesn't seem to be like affecting the movement, so it seems to be working pretty well. Like I can go all the way down and up. I can swivel them totally fine. So basically, just before I start to put in any strings and like actually rig it up, I want to add some shagginess back in here, and that's also going to help me disguise those little wheels. So long story short, I have some really nice long shaggy faux fur, and I've just cut some little tiny pieces of this. And for example, I want to stick this piece like right in here because it's going to add like a nice little shaggy bit coming from the inside of the ear there, and it's going to disguise the wheel. So I'm probably just going to glue that straight to like the underside of this front flap of the ear. I'm going to do the same coming down here and a couple at the back here as well to hide this little mechanical bit here. So hopefully that'll all blend in really nicely with the black hair as well.
Now I'm building up these fur pieces in smaller chunks so that each time I glue one in, I can double check the movement and make sure I'm not interfering with that in any way. With the ears now looking appropriately shaggy, the last step is making sure it's all rigged up so that we actually have some puppetry built in.
I'm thinking of like those old-fashioned marionette puppets, right? Where you've got like the crisscross and then the strings that come down. Because if I have a string that goes at the back and the front of the ear that like are threaded through here and join up at the bottom, so essentially you can move it like this, and that's going to either pull the string from the front or pull the string from the back. So that's going to give me the movement axis on the wheel that I can control in both directions, theoretically or hypothetically. I don't know. Anyway, that's one suggestion. And then on the other axis is being sort of like on the swivel, right? And so I think what I'm going to try and do for that is do another set of wires where it's like pulling from the back of this ear and pulls it back like that. And I might not need one from the front. I'm not sure yet because the strings here might be enough to pull the whole thing forwards without having to have another one here. All right, people with fringes, please tell me how you avoid constantly getting the fringe in your eyes, because this is driving me mental already. Anyway, on this side over here, I've already got 2 strings sewn in. I have one string that is sewn in around here that is threaded through the netting of the wig around here and comes out just under the hairline here. I have exactly the same thing at the back for the back side of the ear, and that basically allows me to pull on this one and that just pulls it forwards, and then this one here just helps perk it back up again. A little bit more subtle at the back, that's fine. I kind of knew that those parts would be a little bit easier. The hard part for me is going to be getting that swivel action here. What I've just tried for now is having a thread through my ear around here, and that is threaded down through the wig cap, not the wig cap, the wig netting. I guess, around the back of my head and comes out on this side. Anyway, the movement here isn't really working. Like I can get a little bit of that pullback, but it's not doing as much as I thought. And I thought that might just be because of that weird direction-y thing. It might also just be that maybe I've sewn it too far in here and I need to get like more distance over here. I'm gonna just muck around with this back one a little bit.
All right, let me try and show you a little bit about how I threaded this, and bear with me because it is like an almost invisible thread against all of this black fur and fabric. We are threading our needle through the front and then back through with the fishing line attached. When it's back at the front here, we are tying this together, and this creates the point that we are going to pull on. Next, we need to thread our needle that has that same fishing line attached down through the netting part of the wig and pull it out through the hairline. That's basically it for string number 1. We are going to do exactly the same thing, but pushing the needle from the back to the front and then back to the back again. Just to be clear, this is an entirely new piece of string. We are once again going to tie this off, and we are going to push that somewhere behind the ear here through the netting of the wig again. For this part, I'm lifting the wig almost entirely off the mannequin head to grab that string and pull it all the way through to the front of the head. Now we've got 2 strings at the front, one that pulls the ear back, one that pulls it forwards. For the swivel action, I'm trying to get a needle in pretty much at the exact side of the ear, and I'm pushing my needle through the netting of the wig somewhere towards the front of the forehead. I'm going to put in another thread exactly at the same spot but at the back of the ear, and this one is going to get threaded through the wig cap right at the back of the crown of the head. And yet again through that netting, and I am pulling that out from the front of the wig. It seems to work best in the end, keeping all 4 strings on the same ear on one side. This side back string for the swivel motion was the one I was the most worried about, but we're definitely getting more motion now.
Okay, so this is like the ultimate test round now. I have 4 strings either side. Put a pin in that because I'll have a big rant at the end of this video, I'm sure, about how impractical this actually is. But to do a quick test round, so that's my swivel forwards, and then that's my swivel back. So if I go like this, oh yes, that is exactly what I was after. Okay, so we have a proper big swiveling motion between those two. And then of course I've got my other 2 axes on the wheel, which will be forwards and then backwards. Wonderful. All right, and the last thing I want to test is whether I can get that pull forwards at the same time as back, as if I'm pinning my ears back. So I've got forwards. Oh my goodness. It does. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it does work. I have a bit of movement on both axes with that. That makes me incredibly happy, right? Because this is it now. That's proven that I have at least been able to get the movement that I wanted. Honestly, I don't care how impractical it is to have 8 strings attached to your headpiece. The fact that I've managed to get the movement looking this good, I'm just really chuffed, guys. I really am. All right, back to my point about it being a little bit hard to control 8 strings at once. I want to try something where I basically make like a cross brace. You know, like at the top of marionette puppets, how they have that little crisscross section that helps them control the strings? I kind of want to do that either side and see if that helps me like just navigate how I control it a little bit better.
For my mini cross braces, I have in my craft stash a bunch of jumbo wooden skewers. I'm going to make mine around 14 centimeters long, and I'm just going to half cut them, half break them to size. For the joint in the middle, I'm just going to whittle away a little bit of like a semicircle right in the center. With these 2 little dents, they fit together quite well. So I'm just going to glue these together with a bit of good old-fashioned hot glue. And for reinforcement, I'm just going to gradually build up some hot glue with some rough twine. And there we have it, the ugliest cross braces you've ever seen. But hey, nothing a coat of paint can't fix. And well, short of tying it on, that's it. Everything's ready. All we have to do is put on some makeup and do a big reveal. So this is the white foundation from Sunset Makeup. This is a little cheat I like to do with my neck. I'm using black hairspray to just very quickly cover it. Around the edges of my face, I've dipped my brush into some black face paint. I thought these lines here might kind of suggest like fur. We're gonna slap on a good dosing of black eyeshadow and of course some liquid eyeliner. You've got to have a cat's eye for our little cat bird. I just shaded my lips a little bit with the black eyeshadow, but I did draw out the brush on the edges to try and elongate the mouth, and I'm carefully drawing on a little cat nose with some liquid eyeliner. I ended up using Prozaid instead of Spirit Gum to stick on my eyebrows. Luckily, I have on hand a very good remover for this stuff as well, so no eyebrow hairs were lost in the making of this cosplay. I had to put on the wig very carefully to make sure I had the strings either side of my face and not caught on anything. It was only at this point that I tied my strings onto the cross braces. That way I could measure while it was on my head how long I needed each string to be. And with a little bit of practice and recalibration, these ears are moving wonderfully. Oh yeah, and I did end up making that second set of mini wings so I can wear these to conventions more easily, but they're definitely still too big for my tiny little office space. Anyway, back to showcasing off these ears, because the range of movement that I've got with these is absolutely incredible. Honestly, I didn't expect to have quite this much range of movement with them, but the strings at this stage are really visible and it'll be obvious that you're moving your hands to control them. But there's a lot of potential here.
Alright, so Husk is complete. I am looking fabulous. So let's review. I'm gonna call this one like a partial success, like a B-. My tail looks fantastic. My gloves are probably one of my favorite parts. Actually, it's just, they look really good. I love the white claws. My eyebrows are cartoonishly large and I absolutely love it. Like, they wiggle so beautifully. Now, getting to the main challenge of the video, the ears, they look fantastic, and like, I definitely managed to get the movement on those different axes like I was hoping for. So that's kind of why I'm calling it a partial success. The partial part comes in because, let's be honest, trying to control everything with like 4 strings on either side of your head with like a crosshatch just hanging down at your side, it's just not a very practical solution. The moving ears that I've made in the past have just had a single string either side, so it's a bit more simple and elegant in that regards. Whereas for this one, to be able to control it, you need to be using both of your hands on these and then make sure they're not getting tangled or caught on anything. And you can't really be doing that as well as trying to control anything with the wings or have the tail attached to your wrist. So once again, I've had some very lofty ideas, but we're a little bit overambitious and haven't really thought too much about the practical side or the comfort side. I think this might be stating the obvious a little bit here, but I need to learn to program servos, because I think those electronic swiveling ears exist in that state for a reason, because once you don't have all of these strings around, you don't really have to think about how you're controlling them while you're wearing it. I think that's the right direction, because it's very clear that I've got the movement going. It's just that I need something more elegant to control them with. But that is a learning curve that future Charlotte can worry about. For me, for now, I'm happy that I tried this out and managed to get something working. I think if I do wear this to a convention, I might just lose the strings and just have fun with it as a static costume. If you have ideas on how I can improve this design, or you've got questions, suggestions, comments, all that sort of thing, please comment them. I've genuinely had such a great time over the last few videos, like reading through some of the comments and replying to you guys and seeing you guys kind of like swap ideas and discuss like how we can do things a little bit differently, because it makes cosplay feel kind of collaborative, like we're all sort of building on each other's ideas to improve, and I love that. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, share this with your mum, share it with your boss, all those YouTubey things that help tell the algorithm robots that you like my stuff and want to see more of it. Massive thank you again to NordVPN for partnering with me today. To get NordVPN for yourself, go to nordvpn.com/misstwisted. An extra special thank you to my ultimate supporters. These are my top supporters on Patreon: Artemis, Dakota, Fluky, Rakishan, Residual Images, Robert Mischief, Tamara, Tim, and Yuri. You guys are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your support. Also a huge thank you to these other Patreon supporters whose names are appearing on screen now. If you want to be as funny and cool and beautiful as these guys, come and join us over on Patreon. I post behind the scenes content, previews, exclusive tutorials, and other goodies. And joining there is the most effective way to support me and all my weird and ridiculous projects. But even if you're just sharing, commenting, all that sort of thing, you are helping me out. So thank you again very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!